I've had this Storm Protector motorbike shelter for around 2 years now, so today I'm going to give you my long-term review. And while I suspect this goes without saying, this video is not sponsored. I bought the shelter with my own money, and the link in the description doesn't earn me any commission. So first up, what is it? Well, the manufacturer claims that it offers the ultimate protection against the elements and all that nature can throw at it. But for me, it's a folding cover for your motorbike that will protect it from the sun, rain and moderate wind, as well as offering a first layer of theft prevention for people who don't have a garage or shed. There are other offerings on the market like the Oxford Stormex which do a similar job, but the Storm Protector has some key advantages, most notably the easy folding mechanism for quick access to your bike. It comes in 3 sizes and I bought the middle of the 3, which was described as the large size and which is advertised to fit sport motorbikes and large scooters. It arrives flat packed all IKEA style, and putting it together was a little bit of a faff. I did it on my own, but there were times when I could have done with someone to hold poles in place while I attempted the next step. But all in all, assembly was pretty easy, took less than an hour, and RevZilla would rank it as a level 1 on their beard scale of difficulty. I did come across one issue though, in that this flap wouldn't fit over the end pole in the way the instructions described. I tried to work it out, then tried brute force, but ultimately gave up. I did email customer service, but they weren't particularly helpful, couldn't fix it, and they ended up ignoring my last message, so I just left it as it is. And that means that I have this weird flap that touches my bike as I open and close the shelter. I could probably DIY fix that quite easily, and it's entirely possible that I did follow the instructions incorrectly, but I just thought it was worth mentioning. And it's also worth mentioning that the shelter has a locking mechanism you can attach a padlock to, although I take the view that a padlock on this adds faff to you every day, but no security, as a thief can easily lift the shelter up. So I prefer to lock the bike up heavily underneath the shelter instead. Once you've built it, it's very easy to ride your bike in and out of. It folds open 2/3 of the way, which leaves plenty of space to fit the bike in and dismount easily enough. Space wise, my bike fits quite nicely, although the bar end mirrors are borderline too wide and mean it's quite difficult to line the bike up perfectly, even when I try to park as far across to the right as possible. But it is pretty spacious, and even my reasonably long Suzuki GT fits with the panniers on, so I think the large size will suit most bikes smaller than adventure bikes or tall rounders. Aesthetically, the shelter does look quite large at first and isn't particularly subtle, but I got used to that quite quickly and I no longer notice how big it is. For reference, the dimensions are 110 cm wide, 163 cm tall and 275 cm long. The extra large version is quite a lot bigger and would give quite a bit more breathing space, but really that's designed for adventure bikes, and I find this large size totally fine for my bikes after 2 years of use. Fitting aside then, how does it perform as a weather shield? Well, I don't have any complaints in that department, and it does absolutely everything I'd expect it to. It completely blocks the sun out so my paintwork hasn't faded, and the bike is always completely dry even in heavy rain. Because it's quite spacious, it does a reasonable job of keeping condensation at bay, but ultimately it isn't really ventilated, so it does still trap a little moisture. Not so much that it's caused me any issues, and I personally don't see that as much of a weak point, but again it is worth mentioning. Now technically it does have some ventilation in the form of a small window on either side of the shelter that velcros shut and ties back to reveal a white mesh. Now I'm not convinced that will actually do much for ventilation though, but I've always kept them closed to keep the sun off the bike, so I can't really say for sure, although the windows are useful sometimes to quickly peek in and make sure the bike is still there. Because the shelter is relatively heavy, it stood firm in pretty much all wind conditions I've experienced, with the exception of one particularly strong storm we had about a year ago that caused havoc across the UK. Now you can fix it to the ground with tent pegs, but given it's basically one big sail, I didn't want to take the risk, so I moved it out of the way before the storm came through to avoid damaging my bike. And it had indeed blown around the next day, so while it's good enough for 99% of weather conditions, at least here in the UK, it won't stand up to the stronger storms, and I don't think most people would buy a canvas shelter like this expecting it to do so. Now as you can see, the shelter itself does lose its nice black colour quite quickly, even in the pathetic levels of sunshine we get here in the UK. But I actually see that as a good thing, because I think it looks less appealing to would-be thieves, although that might be more of a perceived benefit than an actual benefit. The manufacturer says it's guaranteed not to rust, and so far that has been my experience. It sits in quite soggy conditions for much of the year here, but I've seen no signs of rust so far, and it opens as sweetly 2 years on as it did on day one. Overall then, I really like the Storm Protector and I'd happily recommend it to a friend. In an ideal world, I'd like it to be a touch wider and longer, but the XL version I think would look too big for my liking, although it's only £40 more if you can put up with the way it looks. Now the large version is £155 in the UK, which I think actually represents pretty good value. The Oxford Storm X cover I had previously permanently touches the bike, which I was never keen on, especially when the cover got wet, and the Storm Protector is also probably more long lasting, and for me the easy opening and closing mechanism is worth the entrance fee alone. But if you've got any questions, ask down below on your way to the like and subscribe button, and until next time, ride safe.